This is Art Sense, a podcast focused on educating and informing listeners about the past, present, and future of art. I'm Craig Gould. On today's episode, I speak with artist Wolfgang Tillmans. Tillmans is one of only two artists listed on Time Magazine's 100 Most Influential People of 2023, and his work was recently featured in a major retrospective at the Museum of Modern Art in New York. He took time out from installing his latest work at David Zwirner Gallery to discuss his creative process, the importance of installation, and the necessity of play. And now, a conversation about a lifetime of images with Wolfgang Tillmans. Tillmans, thank you so much for joining me this week on the Art Sense podcast. Wolfgang, I know you're very busy. You currently have a show that's coming up at David Zwirner's 19th Street locations. You recently had a retrospective at MoMA that's moved on to Toronto and is headed towards San Francisco eventually. You know, a lot of times, Wolfgang, with artists, I like to start with a hypothetical, which is, let's say by chance you were at a dinner party seated next to someone who has absolutely no idea who you are or what your work consists of. Where do you start to describe that to them?
Oh, it's an awkward one. Well, anyway, what I say, yes, I'm an artist. I primarily work with photography, making installations, room-size installations with images, photographs ranging in size from a postcard size to 3 by 4 meters in scale. The work encompasses video and three-dimensional installations, as well as work in books and print, as well as in sound.
Well, there's a lot there. You know, you mentioned the range of sizes. Do the range of sizes necessarily imply some matter of importance on particular images than others? Well, let me ask you another way. How do you choose? How do you choose which images wind up being the size of a postcard and which ones wind up being 3 by 4 meters?
I see each photograph in an installation as a value, as a language. It speaks in a polyphony that is on a wall, and the largest picture is not necessarily the most important picture, or is not more important than the smallest picture, and they all together speak. Even though each of them speaks with their own voice and their own volume. And sometimes I bring works together because of maybe a seemingly superficial affinity, a color or an arrangement lines that find a resonance in a neighboring adjacent picture. Sometimes there is an actual content narrative connection between two pictures, but more often it is more associative and not literal. And what can be a medium-sized work in this exhibition could become 2 meter in another. And there isn't like a scientific explanation to it. But I see them as building blocks, and I think about an exhibition with, like sometimes 2 years, sometimes 6 months sort of lead up time, and I think about, let's say here in New York right now, I think about it in the context of the audience. What has the audience seen in the past, and how does this operate, what was shown in this gallery before. And so it is a dialogue with my audience that I'm looking for, knowing, of course, that I can't know the audience because they are an anonymous crowd of many. Yes, but still, it is an imagined dialogue. It is a hoped for dialogue with particular individuals that I know live in the city and see the show. So sometimes by focusing on just a few imagined people, even together with my needs and desires, that dialogue brings out a specificity of decision making that that is necessary to create what I do, because what I do looks potentially random at a superficial glance, but the underlying structure, the systematicness that is underlying it, is there, and I can only create that in this non-obvious but present way by channeling the situation in some way that is not too literal, but is not trying to please everybody. I'm not like, how can this be the most successful, or how can this be make everybody happy? I've always felt that if I'm happy and if I know why I'm happy, then there is enough for others to get from the work. I was just thinking, like, when you asked me this dinner question, I gave this most formal and material oriented answer, because it uses language in a much more specific way, where nobody can immediately ask back. But of course, I know that that is not what people want to hear. But when I say, like, I make pictures, usually often photographic, of people, portraits, landscapes, still lifes, and non-figurative kind. But this sounds like everything, but it's actually really specific, and people who are in the know can recognize all of them as mine. It also sounds really convoluted and strange, because normally an artist has like a subject matter that they can name, and that I do sort of touch on so many different fields, but then words are not exactly there to describe why they are so recognizable as mine. It is a difficult thing for me to talk about what makes them special. And that's why I took the avenue towards talking about the materiality.
Well, sometimes there's serendipity in how my conversations with artists lay out chronologically. And it just so happens that tomorrow I'm having a phone call with Edmund Duvall. So my mind recently has really been thinking a lot about collections of artworks and vitrines, and I guess that has me filtering your work in a way that thinks about how you choose to collect these images and display them. And is the final work the individual components, or is the final work how you display it? Would you prefer collectors, to collect the components, or would you prefer them to collect how they're assembled? Like, I'm not sure if I'm making sense, but these are a lot of questions.
I totally understand the question. In the early days, that was often reviewers' take on my work. They said that the overall installation and exhibition is more than the sum of its parts, whilst the individual photographs are not that important. And that is, of course, clearly the opposite to how I saw it and see it. It's just that I refused from the start to employ a language of importance, where I put each picture with a lot of space on a pedestal and give it formal importance. Instead, I had them sit close side by side in limited space, often having to work it out between themselves to be noticed or to be seen, and I felt that by putting strong pictures next to each other, it makes it harder for them, and it takes more generosity for the viewer to also embrace that you might actually see three good pictures spotted up to each other. Language would instantly say, oh yes, so they are only really good as a group. But I've been a little bit wasteful with my material and put them all together because I felt it was a more interesting experimental arrangement than to have each one singled out. And collectors have bought, museums have bought wall installations or sometimes entire rooms, but I don't say that is the only way to collect it, because the individual work is the work for me. So everything that I sign is a freestanding work, and sometimes there are small components in a bigger room. They should not be shown alone.
I know that as we speak today, you're finalizing installation at David Zwirner. I think it might be an interesting insight for listeners to know what that process looks like for you. Well, let me ask you this. Do you know how it's all going to come together beforehand? Or as part of your creative process there in that last mile of installation, I mean, is there still room for gut in the creative process in the installation?
I mean, first of all, one has to look at the word installation, which people in the art world often forget how opaque that is for anybody outside. And I was on the way from the airport. I was speaking to the driver, and he asked me what I do, and I then also said installations of photographs, and that word is often used without really reflecting what exactly does it mean, because it's the placement, I guess. It's the placement of artworks or artwork components in a spatial context, in a room or outside. It can be in relation to the individual components in an open space, or in relation to the given space and how they occupy the walls, and I think that's how I see the word, is that I see the walls as a given, and the doors and the corridors and the windows. All of that is a given that is hosting me, and I then interact with these surfaces by placing very thin three-dimensional objects on them. These pictures are not two-dimensional. No? They have a protruding third dimension into the room, and what I I love is how an artwork sits on a wall in a space, be that in a church, where some of my first art experiences as a child stem from, or in a museum, and to be able to see an artwork in this what I call a laboratory-like situation, because like this white cube is a kind of lab. And I find it's an incredible privilege to be given over these, I don't know, 600 square meters of this gallery for 5 weeks, and for 2 weeks in advance, where I can install, where I can experience the space. And that is an incredible moment that happens a few times a year only, where I can take my objects and feel and see what they do on that bit of wall. But in order to have the correct and right objects with me, I need to plan, because you cannot ship like tons of material across the Atlantic and that you don't use. And that's why I built a model in my studio, and have done so since really early on, since 96, and always using the relatively large scale of 1 to 10, so that 1 inch in the model is actually 10 inches in real. These models sit in my studio for several months, and they become an approximation of what the final exhibition would be like and could be like, only to help me determine what to take with me, what to ship. And then once I'm in the space, I start by putting up the works according to the model, but then stray from that, and then I'm free to rethink it all. And in the past, the rethinking often happened before I even completed putting up the model in the real space. And I've become, I think, ever better at working in the model, so that I now resist the impulse, the convenient artistic impulse to constantly be rethinking things. And now I have to remind myself, no, no, first hang everything as you imagined it, and then change it.
Back there, you referred to this installation in the gallery as being like a lab like environment. And that was one of the things that struck me when thinking about viewing your work. It's almost, given how you vary sizes, how you group them, how you hang them with pins and pieces of tape. It's almost like we're entering like a simulated studio environment where you, the artist, we're kind of peeking behind the curtain and seeing you, the artist, looking for meaning and discernment.
I mean, yes, and yes and no, because the interest in seeing, experiencing simultaneity on a wall, the coexistence of different moments photographed, of different scales, that simultaneity is something that, of course, I test out in my studio. But it is different to a sort of ongoing, meandering situation that has no beginning and end. So the language of immediacy and intimacy and certain casualness that I think you refer to as the look of a studio, is something I employ, but I use it to create something that is then no longer in flux. It has settled. It looks like it could be. It has been in flux, and it should feel open-ended. But for me, as the author, I would never touch a finished installation of mine. Once I'm done, I'm done, and I never 3 days later look at it and feel the desire to change anything.
Your work, these component pieces take on so many different forms. There's genre, there's portrait, there's abstract. How would you define what the common thread is that joins all your work together? Is it purely you and what is attractive to you?
I think bearing complexity is enjoying complexity and bearing complexity, and and enjoying play and life, the joy of life, the joy of seeing. There are genuinely fairly unfiltered fascinations with the sensation of being alive, of experiencing nature, of experiencing astronomy, experiencing sexuality or the body or food or tactility. That curiosity and joy, and lack of fear of play being not serious, is paired with a deep sense for the pointlessness of it all, the complexity and interdependence of it all, and the tragedy that is underlying and looming over everything. And I think, existentialism had a strong impact on me as a teenager in high school. In French, we read Camus, and that the revolt of the human, and the even though, that for me is even though it was that philosophy is deeply non-religious. I think the even though is generally a very spiritual impulse, because to believe in some kind of meaning in the light of an obviously inexplicable and dark universe is a leap of faith. And so I, like the spirituality that interests me is less delineated by a specific organized religion, than a certain sense of humility in the light of not knowing, and to accept my not knowing whilst I try to do as much as I can to know, and to make things turn out well, and to try to decrease suffering, trying to not do more harm. That is the web, that is the constellation, from which is the point of departure for everything I do, and that's the where my eye is, where I'm located, and from there I look outward.
Those works of yours that are considered portraits, that those works that may have some sort of implied narrative, do you consider those works truth or fiction?
Are you talking about a portrait sitting, somebody looking at the camera?
For example, like I've had a guest on once who had a long conversation with Nan Golden, and one of her key takeaways was, for as controversial as her photos were, she never created with the intent to shock. She was just documenting the crazy world around her, right?
Mm-hmm.
I guess my question is, Do you find a lot of your work being from the end of the spectrum that's documenting, or is it from the end of the spectrum where you're staging because you have a clear narrative in your mind?
I don't know of another artist where the spectrum of staged to found, reportage to scenario is so equally present in shifting degrees from 0 to 100. Like myself, it's maybe the strongest characteristic that there isn't this one modus operandi that stems from not from a rejection of wanting a system, but it comes from a deep respect for that truth is only is never an absolute, because it always has, I mean, it always has to do with the intention of the eye and the mind behind the camera. That is also, by the way, goes for a song or for a canvas. So in science, and in society, social sciences, I am not a fan of just, well, there's endless amounts of truth. No, like I think there is there are facts, and the importance of observation is also something that is at the heart of my work, coming from maybe the visual initiation that I experienced as a teenager through astronomy, and learning about the importance of observation. In art, truth is a style. It's not an absolute, and it can only be truthful to your intentions. And so the moment that I say I want this photograph to look like somebody, well, I don't know, felt excited on a beach. If I then stage that photograph, or hunt and wait for hours and days on a beach until that happens, doesn't really matter in its truthworthiness in the result. But this how is, of course, interesting to people because it's something to hold on, to talk about. And so in photography, I observed early on that the W questions are constantly dominating the perception of the work. Like, who is this? Where is this? When? Or how did you do this technically, or whatever? And I was sort of disappointed and sometimes angered by this, because I felt like when you look at an asparagus still life by Manet, are you first asking whose asparagus is this? No, as a viewer, accept this proposal from the art, proposes you this take, open up to it as a listener to a piece of music. You are willing to open your ears, and not immediately ask back, what is this? Who is this? But because photography has this reality as its subject and technical sort of origin, they think that it really is about what you see. When I have somehow been lucky to have always understood, my photographs are just paintings that I didn't need to paint. You know, they are about maybe about the sheen on that surface, or they are about an emotion I once had. And and so this one-to-oneness, that language and photography that blocks a free flow of openness or undirectedness, is something that I worked against. And of course, I'm not stupid. I was also realizing the immediacy of photography, the ease of photography is also incredibly powerful. And so I've been learning since the mid-90s, when all these different sort of counteract impulses, when I learned understanding them fully, I've employed them, for example, use the assumption of reality to make pictures without cameras that operate fully in the realm of painting, really, but are seen and perceived through the realm of evidence, because the eye understands this is photography, so it must be evidence of some reality.
Along those lines, do you consciously work to address social issues in your work, or do they just show up as a result of your worldview, as a result of your gaze?
I think the first and foremost impulse for me was play. The question, can I do this? Can I make a picture out of this? And also art historical play, like there have been 30,000 years of painting. Can I add to this history of depicting trees by photographing this tree? That is also a playful question. It's not just a serious push. It's play. Like we often only discover new things through undirected research, which can also be called sometimes play. So that made me realize, yes, I have potential to make unexpected, unique visual results. But on the other hand, I'm also a passionate participant of society and observer of society, as well as of other artists and music. So, and how music and art shapes and creates culture. And all of that is also located in politics, because the way we live together, that is actually politics, how we organize living together. And to understand, like, being born in 1968, when I started to become like fully politically aware at around 13, 14. My life is this short, double the amount of my life before I was born. There were millions of people murdered in my country, thousands sent into death chambers from this city. Like, what were these people before I was born? What made them do that? Why are we now listening to new wave and new romantic pop music? How can society change so much? And why could I listen to Small Town Boy by Bronski Beat being in the top 10 radio charts in 1984 when I had my coming out? You have to be quite blind to not marvel at the potential of history to affect lives for the better and the worse. And that's where I feel I've admired how art has always played a role in communication and in advancing politics and civil rights, and also understand also where art cannot deliver, where ultimately only democracy and participation in democracy delivers, and or rebellion delivers, and I felt they were always naturally connected, and try to protect myself from using this most precious precious and universal right. I didn't want to own it by saying my art is political, and I thought everybody should be political, and I didn't want to somehow claim political, because it also always is a then soon messianic or do-gooder. So like the whole Brexit campaign, which made me become an activist. I was, it was only really the emergency of it all that made me throw to the wind any doubts of, ooh, I don't want to seem like a do-gooder, crusading saint, Sting, Bono. But I've become more pragmatic also over the last 8 years, and it's. I mean, we are shaping this future here right now, and the future does not care about if it looks good to be posing in this political, slightly detached way or that way. This is a moment of enormous importance and significant, and I judge today everything I do really with a sense of is this right to spend time on this exhibition here in New York, where I am looking into the finest nuances of representation and the hues of color, and whilst atrocities are committed every day in Europe, and a massive movement is in action to obliterate liberal society, and I don't think we have the time to just sit on the fence on that.
Well, I think you're touching at least tangentially on the question of what is the value of art, right? Does art have value in urgent times? And that raises questions of the value of beauty, the value of everything that defines art, right?
Mm-hmm. I mean, art in hard times is also there as a reminder for what one strives for. It's not only the absence that is being depicted, but it's maybe also the dream or the utopia, and without it all being a smoke screen and deflection. I mean, if everybody would only depict the atrocities of war during a war, it's I can't judge this because I'm fortunate not to have lived that close to war, not to be talking about what choices one actually has in that moment. But I mean, I think one fortunately doesn't have to be that harsh on art, because the greatest power of one great power of art is that it is useless. No, that it doesn't have an applied design purpose. It is not a propaganda tool by definition. It's not it's not communication design. Like a billboard can be art, but not every billboard is art. And that purposelessness and the daydreaming, the absurdity, the humor, the shock, those are uniquely human qualities that that cannot be programmed and cannot be planned, and that is what we love in art. When we see great art, that is what triggers us. It sometimes can have a direct political impulse, but if that is the origin of it all, it can only be the origin. It can only be about that origin that you planned, and and um, and I think it is the irrationality, what you cannot explain, what is not in words, that makes art so unique and so difficult also to make, maybe in war, when there is little room for directionless research, as I like to call it. Because survival has quite a strong direction.
Certainly. Before I let you go, I'd love to get your perspective on this new show that you're wrapping up the installation at Zwirner. What can people anticipate seeing when they come to Fold Me?
I wanted the exhibition, the first new work after my retrospective at MoMA. And that is this point in a career that a moment that will be in my life forever, as a before MoMA and after MoMA, and it has been in so many artists' lives and careers as well, and how to continue after the biggest show in the most prestigious museum you could ever think of is a big question, and I because of Corona, COVID, and MoMA, there hasn't been a gallery show of mine in New York in 5 years. And so it's been time. But then I also, a year ago, thought, I'm just opening this huge show at the museum. Will it not look bad coming back after less than a year? And is it overstaying my welcome? Because I feel extremely welcome in New York. It's maybe my most educated, my most faithful audience. There's a really intensive relationship, deep relationship I feel with the city and the audience here, and I realized that if I wait another year, people would still say, "Oh, MoMA was just like yesterday." And so I thought that would only increase my apprehension by another year. And so to just go straight in and say, after 8 months after it closed, I continue the conversation with this expansive new exhibition, just felt like a risk, but also a liberating move, because now it's done, and I am now in post-MoMA land, and so what I want, is like everything here has not been exhibited before anywhere else. Every work is unseen, and most of them are new by terms of like 1, 2, 3 years old. I often don't look at pictures for 2 years or a year, and only edit them after a longer period of time. And so even a 3 years old picture is for me new. And the surprising thing is that for me that the majority of the works are made with a camera, with a straight photography camera, and to after this amount of years have been able to cull new angles from the subject matter that ranges from again, landscape, portrait, still life, makes me happy that it feels not a break from the past, and at the same time they are all moving forward. And there's a new video which is called Seeing the Scintillation of Sirius Through a Defocused Telescope.
Wolfgang, I really appreciate your time today. The exhibit at David Zwirner is up September 7th through October 14th. Fold Me at the 525 and 533 West 19th Street locations in New York. And then for the folks that are interested in the retrospective, it's still up at the AGO in Toronto through October 1st. And then we'll travel to SF MoMA. It's been a real pleasure speaking with you, a real honor. I really appreciate your time today.
Hey, thank you, Craig. I hope I wasn't too abstract.
No, not at all. That's all the time we have for this week. You've been listening to ArtSense. You can find the show on Apple Podcasts, iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher Radio, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. If you've enjoyed this podcast, be sure to subscribe. And while you're there, please rate the show and leave a quick review. Your feedback is the key to other folks finding us. And if you'd like to see images related to the conversation, read the transcript, and find other bonus features, you can go to cambia.art and click on the podcast tab. If you'd like to reach out to me, you can email me at craig@cambia.art. Thanks for listening.